So I want to start. Can I start? Do you need to start recording or anything, Katie? You're good. Okay. Just making sure I'm not messing things up here. Okay. So we are here. My name is Kacee Jarnot. She, her, hers. I serve as a student success manager and also the interim director of assessment for the Division of Student Affairs. And so we're going to talk about data visualization. When I met with people from across the division when I first got the interim role, not first, when I got the interim role, one of the things people said is we need help understanding how to tell the story of the data that we get. And so I was like, all right, let's do a presentation on data visualization then. Let's do this. Hey, Ali, would you mind passing that back to him so he can sign, please? So that's what we're going to do today. So I left these things in here for the presentation purposes. The LSC mission, centering students, and the community, or the principles of community, just because I think they're important to sort of center who we are as a community and the ways in which we talk about data at CSU. You'll see the examples I picked from, or to give here today, they center on the student experience, but I will be the first person to name. I don't think as an institution we do that as well as we ought to. So the more we can center students in the practice, the more we can engage in our principles of community, the better our outcomes will be as it relates to data. At the end of this presentation, my hope is that you are able to do these three things, which this was part of what was on the website, so it's not, this should be familiar, like what you signed up for when you decided to come to this presentation. But why it's important to think about the way that we build data visuals, to think about why you would use what kind of chart and when, and then to think about design elements that help tell the story of whatever it is you're trying to present. If it's effective, it tells a story. It helps us understand how values relate to one another, portrays quantities. I think there's some importance there to be able to say, this is the scale that we're looking at, or this is the number of students we're looking at, or some of those kinds of things. It organizes information and makes comparison easy. And then the whole point of using data visualization, or like thinking about data visualization, is to make obvious how the viewer should interact with the data, right? I don't want folks guessing about what I want you to take away from the data that I'm sharing with you. I want to share with you and then have you know this is what the data is telling me. So we're going to start with the brainstorming activity. Lucky you. I know, welcome. So basic visuals, what I want you to do, so we're going to take about a minute. In 1 minute, do you need a piece of paper, Mo? Okay. Welcome. Okay. Want you in 1 minute to sketch as many different ways that you can think of to visualize these two numbers. Okay? Ready? Go. Sorry, this is going to be terrible. Okay, about 10 more seconds. Sketch away. Okay. So what did you come up with? Lots of figures, did you say?
Less figures, just a lot of different number representations.
Okay, such as?
3/4 and 1/4.
Okay. Percentage?
25 and 0.25.
Okay.
100 minus 25.
Yes.
100 minus 75.
Yes.
3 and 1.
3 and 1, yeah, right? The visual ways of showing that. Okay. Other examples?
Beyond what Jake mentioned, there's also, I also did a few different charts and graphs.
Mm-hmm.
So histograms, pictograms, scatter plots, as well as kind of a comparison between the two, as well as the separation.
Okay, so lots of different chart types. Got a scatter plot out of that. That's impressive. Yeah.
Try.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to share?
Bar graph.
Bar graph? Pie chart? Check. Concentric circles. Get it, Mo. That's 25 overlaps. I see you. I see you. Okay. This is great. So that's kind of what we're thinking about and doing today, is thinking about all the different ways that we can visualize data differently than just numbers, okay? So what we're going to talk about today is selecting your visual type, then simplifying your visual, and then enhancing your visual, okay? So that's what our 3 categories are for today. So starting with selecting your visual type, section header. If you Google fancy data visualization, this is an example of what comes up. Wow, right? There's so many things on this page, I'm not even entirely sure where to start. Some of them are great, like this scatter plot with colors could be very cool. Some of these you can see like line graphs, bar graphs, etc. here. This one's got a nice color scheme going on. However, it can get real fancy real fast, and I think that's not often what we need, even though I think sometimes that's what we try to do, right? So this is gorgeous. It overwhelms me. I actually have no idea where to even start with that one. This one, can't be sure. Can't be sure if those are snakes or like confetti, or I'm not sure. And then this one, to me, looks like, you know, sound waves. When they visualize sound waves, that's what that looks like to me. So I can't be sure what's happening here. There's a 3D option up here. So we're going to avoid that and sort of start with the simple chart basics, which are these ones. Familiar? Right? Any Word document, any Microsoft application will pull up these charts for you here. So we're going to go through each of these and when and how and why you would use them. So the overview is here. Bar or column compares groups or categories. The line chart shows change over time, and then the pie chart is the part to hold data that you were referencing with your charts for the 75 and 25%, if we're getting to 100, okay? So starting with the simple bar and column charts. These are good for a lot of different things. Like you said, you can compare 25%, 75%, and many other things. And it's easy for the brain to process like where the juxtaposition is and where you might need to focus, which is important to keep it simple. It's got a lot of useful variations, and bar charts will be your friends if you use them all. Here are the basics. For simple, like for me, the main difference, people say, well, why would you use a bar chart versus a column chart? And in my brain, there's probably a lot of reasons, but in Kacee's brain, there's one significant reason why you would choose one or the other. If you have super long categories, like titles, that you're trying to use, a bar chart's gonna be better because on a slide like this, you just have more width to be able to put more words here versus thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 4. So that's the main thing, but sometimes you just get bored, right? If you've used, I don't know, 3 column charts, in the next slide you might want to switch it up and do a bar chart, right? Because you're showing the data. Please don't do that. We're going to talk about different ways to visualize data. That's the whole point of the presentation. But there's many reasons why you would use them. That is the main distinguishing factor to me. And I will send you all this presentation afterwards, so just know that that's true as well. If we want to elevate them a little bit, get a little bit fancy with our bar charts, there's different ways that you can organize them to tell a story. So let's say, for example, to order by percentages, that we want to look at the reasons students visit the Laurie Student Center from least to most, right? That students are telling us these are the reasons that we come in here. They might not be ordered like that in the survey that you send out, but you can order them in the way that makes sense to you to help tell that story. Let's say we want to compare year over year. Just to pull an example, we want to look at the percentage of registered student organizations that sign up to be part of CS Unity. And so we want to look at it by academically based groups, social based groups, religious based groups, or like fraternities and sororities. So we can look by group year over year to see how students are participating in a particular event. So that's when you'd want to use a clustered column, is to kind of show comparison over time. To elevate, oops, I went the wrong way, sorry. To elevate bar charts, you could use stacked bar charts to show, I know the word is Likert, but I just can't, so to show Likert scales. It works best when the total across all of them is 100%, so you're comparing truly apples to apples. But this will show you an average of whatever the statement is here, and then what percentage agree, strongly agree, et cetera, et cetera. So your eye is automatically drawn toward whatever statement 3 is, a solid 88% of respondents strongly agree with that statement, versus number 2 is a little more spread out. What does that mean? What are we talking about? What are some observations you can take away from that, just seeing it in this format, right? So you are directing what the story is by sharing the visual in this way, right? Saying this is to 100% for whatever reason this statement is more than most. Let's talk about what that means, right? The next one is a diverging bar chart. And this is like almost too fancy, if you will, because your brain has to think a little bit about what this is saying. This is the same data as the previous chart, but eliminating the middle pieces and saying strongly agree versus strongly disagree. And it makes your brain work a little bit harder. Like visually, you can still see this one is by far, the one that's the strongly agree from the previous slide. And then the 1% that strongly disagrees, and you can still see that that's a wide margin there. But it makes your brain work a little bit harder because this isn't like a normal graph that I see. Why is the 0 in the middle? Shouldn't these be negative? Like it makes your brain work a little bit harder. So while it gives you like a stunning visual, make sure it's simplified enough when you're using it. And I would say use it kind of sparingly because it's less common and it makes people work harder when you're trying to tell the story of data. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's talk about line charts. This is fun, isn't it? I'm a PR major, so this is actually really fun for me. So this is best, like we said earlier, to use or show change over time, but I just will encourage you to be aware of how many lines are on any given slide, because let's just learn. Right? There's a lot of data going on here. I actually pulled this out of the 2018-2019 Alternative Break Survey, because we want to know, where do students learn about this? But what do you make of this? Can't be sure, right? Cannot be sure. And I'm not sure if faculty is this line or this line. You know what I mean? So what can we do to kind of simplify that over time is really what I want you to think about that. And to look at what is the story we're trying to tell. It could be highlighting these two and saying, wow, fewer students are learning about alternative breaks through the collegiate and flyers and posters. This is made up data, so just know I have affection for our collegiate colleagues. So it could be that this is the story. It could also be that more students are learning about alternative breaks through social media and the SLICE website. And when we look at this over time, what might be the reason for that, right? That we're going away from paper touchy things to more media kind of things, right? So how do you highlight to be able to tell the story that in 2020 that changed for us for these reasons and as a result, perhaps, of the pandemic, right? You may also want to tell the story of the greatest change over time. So looking at this, we know these two were kind of similar. In 2019, they were about the same, and then in 2020, they diverged pretty significantly. Again, why? If people are on campus, or people aren't on campus, they're probably not seeing digital screens, but they might be using social media more to get more information about what they might be able to participate in. So you get to choose what the story is based on what you know about the data and the ways in which you want to share that with the audience. Just because we have all the data doesn't mean it's a great idea to show all the data, okay? So simplify as much as you possibly can. If there's a lesson from this presentation, like a takeaway, simplify, okay? Pie charts, the best way to display 100% of data with different chunks, right? Minimize this. How many of you have seen pie charts with like 25 different slices? How many of you have used pie charts with 100 different slices? Oh, it's me, it turns out. I want you to see all the data. It's not a good choice. So what can you do to sort of combine, condense, and kind of get a gist of what the responses are in fewer chunks that show a better, clearer story? If you want to take these up a notch, kind of make them a little fancier, you can use donuts to show visual preferences, or visual percentages. So this, again, I pulled from the Alternative Break survey, and this is the response. So you can kind of see sophomores are participating at higher rates. What does that mean? What does that look like? Our freshmen not participating because they're new, they don't necessarily know about it. It's a, like kind of a building up to it. There's some pre-work that needs to be done. So what do we need to do to get freshmen more engaged, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how to make pie charts a little fancier. Okay, questions so far? Before you two arrived, I just was naming. I have 54 slides to get through in 50 minutes, so we are motoring through this. If you have questions, stop me. I know I'm a fast talker. So then the question becomes, do I always have to use a chart? And my answer would be, please don't. You can find different ways to show data that get the point across without having to do a graph. So I pulled this information directly from Institutional Research, their InFact book from FY21. So these are legit numbers about Colorado State University. We had a 70% six-year graduation rate, 85% freshman retention rate from fall to fall, first fall to second fall. 69% of our students are Colorado residents, 26% diverse enrollment, which is our highest to date, and that's racially and ethnically diverse. And then 42% of our students are STEM majors. In the InFact book, it's STEM. I added the second into medicine because I believe it should be part of this. I don't know that the percentage actually reflects that. Let's just name that. Okay. So you can do it just by accent colors and zhuzhing the numbers a little bit. You can also add some icons. Graduation rates, plus sign. You could have done an arrow there. There could be, I don't know, some other things that you could use. I like the plus sign. We have mountains in Colorado. People, and then the beaker for STEM students. I could have picked a calculator. I could have picked an engineering, wheel, any of those kinds of things. But I like the beaker, so here we are. But you can do it right through this representation, and it gets the point across without having to show a graph or a chart or any of those kinds of things. The other way I would say, just use icons and color, right? Again, pulling from the InFact book, 1 out of 4 students is first gen. This one's green. These ones are 80% black. Goes in line with branding statement, or branding CSU brand standards. So maybe pick a different color, but you get the point. You can also just use an image with text. So just say the thing that you found as part of your survey results. 7 out of 10 students say that student organization involvement helped them with building career competencies. That's awesome. We want to make sure that we're highlighting whatever the good picture is of the students doing the thing, and then saying, here's what they got as a result of it. Okay, so that is the first chunk about quantitative data and different ways that you can show it. Good? And the next question becomes, what about qualitative data? This is exciting, right? Okay. So how many of you have seen this? Where people say, here's all the responses to the thing that we want to make sure that you see. It's very important to us to tell you what the students' responses are to whatever it is we're doing, so we're going to give it all to you. How many of you are guilty of doing this? Oh, it's me. Still me. Okay. Also, if I'm you, I can read the short ones pretty quickly, right? Educational and fun. Wish I could go back every single day, etc. The longer ones, going to take me longer to read and also longer to process. What are the themes? What do I need to take away from this? This is actually not helpful other than to show students responded to your survey. So please don't do this. Instead, show people what's most important. If there's a quote that's particularly meaningful, pick it out and give it some highlighting. The site leaders were amazing. This has been one of my top highlights for my CSU experience, and now I want to make an impact by becoming a site leader next year. That's awesome, right? So we want to make sure that we are highlighting the things that we want people to take away visually. Another way to do this is through word clouds, right? Everyone's familiar with word clouds by now, but the bigger the word, the more frequently it is referenced. What I would say about this is it maybe isn't super helpful to just plop a word cloud out there and go next, because you can see that site leaders were impactful, but like, what does that mean, right? How? Was it positive? Was it negative? Or why? In what ways were site leaders helpful or impactful in this particular experience? So what I want you to do is go back to this slide, pull out, not you right now, but like if you have the data, you would go back and you would pull out every single comment that talks about site leaders so that you can start to theme some of those comments and share out, this is the reason why site leaders were impactful. So if you're showing this slide to a group of folks, you would say, let me give you a few examples of what students said about site leaders. One student said, I also thought the site leaders were fantastic throughout the process. I really looked up to them during this trip. Another student said, the site leaders really made this trip worthwhile, and the experience was amazing, 3 exclamation points. I learned, I grew, and now I want to be a site leader. Lastly, one student said, the site leaders were very organized and everyone in the group would say the same. Big shout out to them for all the pre-trip meetings. I can see the work they put in to provide us with all the information necessary before the trip. They went above and beyond to provide us with readings, video clips, resources, etc. They even brought in guest speakers. I truly felt the Outbreak magic, and I just have so much admiration for the site leaders and the work they did to make this trip possible. Now you have context for why the site leaders were so important and impactful in students' feedback, right? So you have to do some work on the back end to be able to explain the visualization and tell the story that you want to make sure is being told about the student experience. Okay, so those are all the options that we're going to cover today. Now I want to talk about simplifying your visual. So I'm going to give you some tips, and then I'm going to walk you through kind of a step-by-step of how to do it, okay? When you reduce the non-data ink by, please don't use 3D graphs. They seem fancy and maybe nice, not necessary. No background images or colors, keep it simple, right? When you're presenting sort of the things, I want you to remove decimals, remove or reduce lines where possible. Try not to use a legend because it makes your eye move around more. Remove redundant text and or data, and reduce the number of colors used, okay? So we're gonna use this. I pulled from a survey about the Laurie Student Center this information about how satisfied are you with the cleanliness of different aspects of the Laurie Student Center. And when I put it in Microsoft and say, give me a bar graph, stacked bar graph, stacked column graph, this is what it gave me. Don't settle for this mess. That is the moral of this story. We're better than this, okay? Sorry, Microsoft. Thanks for the products you offer us. So first, remove the lines. You don't need the grid lines in the back. You don't need the outline around here, right? Because you're already looking in a frame presentation, right? So get rid of the lines and remove the outline. Next, remove decimals. Like it says in the column, sometimes you need to differentiate between 55 and 55.7%. It's not often, right? So let's just roll it up and make the story what we need it to be or what we want it to be, what the data is actually showing us, okay? So both in the axis and in the bars themselves, reduce that ink. Collapse categories. In a lot of cases, same that we were talking with the pie chart earlier, in a lot of cases you can combine specific categories to tell the story in a more clear message. So you can combine satisfied and very, or dissatisfied and very dissatisfied, and satisfied and very satisfied, okay? So now we can see big chunks of blue, less chunks of orange and light orange, okay? So when you look at this then, what's the story? Mostly satisfied. Students are mostly satisfied with the cleanliness of the Laurie Student Center, right? Okay, so simplify that story. We don't need the 1% that said, I'm dissatisfied with the cleanliness of the restrooms. The story is, by and large, people are satisfied with the cleanliness of the Student Center. So if we're saying that, then we can also take it one step further and get rid of this legend. Just put it in the title. Percent of students who are satisfied or very satisfied with LSC cleanliness, right? So it removes, so one less place for your eye to look. Then simplify or streamline the column text. You don't need the whole statement to say, how satisfied are you with the cleanliness of this? We put it in the title, so these are just the areas that they were asked to rank, okay? Then, last but certainly not least, format it for visual impact, right? The tiny gray font that Microsoft gives us is not super helpful if you're sitting in the back of this room, right? So to make it more accessible, to be more thoughtful about the story that you're telling, make it a little bit bigger. We want to minimize the vertical axis, but keep it visible. So I think even in this one, I could have gone, because it was tens before, I think even in this one, I could have gone like 0, 50, 100, because you get the scale, right? But I always want you to keep the scale because it gives the context of what you're looking at, right? Like number of students, percent of something, and how many of us have seen a graph that goes from here to here and then back down to here, and come to find out the axis is like 0.5%, right? That's sensationalism in media. We don't want to be those people. We want to give people the full scale, but also so help them understand where it is, but it also doesn't need to be like at the forefront of what you're trying to present, right? That's not the data, it's just the scale. Enhance font size and color, and then make sure everything sort of represents CSU brand standards, which we'll talk about more in a second, to kind of tell the story. So when you look at it this way, what do you see now?
You see a clear representation of the story that you're trying to tell with the data. The numbers are easy to read. The background is clear. The context is provided and simplified.
Simplified. It's the moral of the story. Do you have any questions when you look at it in this format? I do. How come the restrooms only got 91% and everybody else got above 95%? Right? It's 90+%, it's still good, but I just have questions about why that is, because it changes, right? That scale looks a little bit different at the top. So again, this is where it's up to you all, as the holders of the data, to really understand why was that marked a little bit lower. So say you go into the comments and you see that most people are saying we are running out of hand soap or hand sanitizer in the highly trafficked bathrooms. I may or may not be talking about the one that's right next to Slice and the info desk. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's always very well stocked. So this is a false example, but just say that that's what you're finding. Then you're able to say, standing up here, here's what we're doing then as a Laurie Student Center to support our awesome environmental tech staff in doing their jobs to help this be a little bit higher. It's the high traffic, right? So how are we kind of changing our operations to be able to help our staff implement what's needed by our customers? Just an example, but again, shows that you all need to go in and understand what's behind the data instead of just showing the chart and saying, we're doing good, because we are. And then also, Kacee in the back will have a question about how come bathrooms are only at 91%. Okay. So here we go. A couple of these. Same story, less ink, clearer message, right? Here's the before. Earlier when it pasted in the colors of the, CSU brand standards. When I pasted it in this time, it didn't. Can't be sure. But we can fix that, right? And give you the after kind of data. We don't need all of this. We just need to tell the story. Let's do another one. Same story, less ink, clearer message, lines, right? And we'll talk about color a little bit in a second. But this tells the story that we want it to tell instead of making viewers guess at what the story should be. Another example, no chart. You don't need to use a chart all the time, right? If you take those 3 columns that we simplified and average them, on average, 95% of students are satisfied or very satisfied with the cleanliness of LSC entrances, hallways, and restrooms. That's awesome. And then we can put a nice picture of the Student Center that just happens to be right over here. See how clean it is? We did good. Okay. Questions about those changes? Are these things that you all are already doing, thinking about? Yeah? Okay. Good. Okay, so the last piece of this presentation is enhancing the visuals. And we're going to capture pre-attentive processing, so the ways in which your brain tells your eyes what you're seeing is what that means. Okay? How many of you are familiar with Gestalt Principles? Gestalt's a German word. It means like unified something. I forget. It's fine. But the Gestalt Principles were created by 3 German psychologists in the 1920s, and they really wanted to figure out how your brain helped your eyes make sense of the chaos that you're seeing in the world, right? Like how do you make order out of disorder? And so there are these principles or laws of human perception that describe how humans group similar elements, recognize patterns, and simplify complex images when we perceive objects. And designers use these principles for websites, presentations, other interfaces to make things aesthetically pleasing and make sure it's easy to understand. So these are legit design principles. You can Google it and learn more for sure, get examples, etc. I have some resources later. But are there 5? Are there 7? Are there 10? It really depends on what you're reading and who you're looking at. But these are the ones that are most common. And you can kind of see the descriptions there. If things are close together, we group them together. If things look similar, we group them together. If things are enclosed together or there's an enclosure around something, we group them together. Closure, an example would be like, this is a triangle kind of a situation here. And then if we did like a square, sorry, these colors are not great and my things are totally to scale. But you can see how that's kind of closed. And then let's say we do a circle over here, but we leave this chunk open. Then our brain automatically goes to this part that's open, because why is it different from the other objects that you have up here? So that's what closure is. Continuity, you can see, and then connection. Like I did with the arrow in the text example earlier, if you take it from regular text to highlighted text, then that arrow showed your eyes that you should be focusing on the latter part of that. So those are just sort of how some of the Gestalt principles work. And then I'll show you a couple more. So here's some examples. Scale, color, like why are those three highlighted? Why do I need to look at those differently? Proximity, so like we talked about with the registered student organizations comparing year over year. Hierarchy, why are students visiting the student center? If you have a different shape, your eye will be drawn to it. Size, this is why bubble charts are so popular, because you can kind of see like the volume at which things are being said or items are being talked about. Position, this one's not my favorite, I'm not gonna lie. It's very displeasing to my eyes, but also it makes an impact, right? I'm drawn to what is happening here and why is this one sort of out of place and why do I need to look at that? And then the last one is enclosure, there. Okay. And while we're on the topic of color, let me just give you some tips about color. Color resources are available here. I would say in any presentation, try to use the same color for the same variables throughout. Maybe it was hard to see, but in the line chart with all the different lines, whether I used all the lines or just a few lines, I made them, they were the same color kind of throughout. So people know continuity. If this is the color for the collision, it's going to be the color for the collision throughout the entire presentation, right? So thinking about that so people get used to seeing what you're putting out and can understand what you're trying to show them more easily and quickly. Designing gray and adding color later. What I like about this particular slide is you don't need a bunch of color and a bunch of lines and a bunch of leaders to kind of see what the things are. So if you design in gray and then add the color in later, then that allows you to kind of tell the story that you want to tell and highlight the things that are most important to the visualization you're trying to offer. Be aware of color symbolism. Perhaps this is a soapbox because it's June, but not everything needs a rainbow right now because it's Pride Month, right? Like if you're presenting about that and it makes sense about the history of Pride or about the GLBTQ community, do it. If you are presenting about data visualization, don't do it just because it's the month. And maybe I'll step off that soapbox for a hot second. That's more about perhaps corporations than it is about us in this room. But the meanings of colors around the world, right? Red means something different in the United States than it does in China, than it does in Mexico, right? And so thinking about who's your audience, what's the intent that you're trying to use, or the intent that you're trying to get across, and are you being thoughtful about that, are just things to think about as you're choosing color palettes. The last piece is there are color limitations. Not every human is able to see the full spectrum of color. So generally, stoplight colors don't work. Generally, orange and blues are easier for people to see over time. So doing just a little bit of thought about that to make sure that they're accessible to everyone is an important consideration when doing data visualization. And to sort of help with some of these pieces and know that like we don't have to know all the things all the time, CSU has brand standards that can help us with this. So these are just screenshots from the brand website. So if you go to brand.colostate.edu and click on color, you'll get all three of these. So these are our main colors, our primary colors, CSU green, gold, and white. Not only does it tell you exactly what shade of green we should be using, there's a thing on there that tells you percentage-wise how much of what you're doing should be green versus gold versus white. Like, it's very detailed. And if you're using a secondary color as a primary color, how you can still add CSU green into the whatever it is you're marketing, because that's still our primary color. So there's a ton of information that the experts have provided us on this website that all you have to do is go and read it and use it. So we have primary colors, we have secondary colors, 80% black, not sure why 80% black, but that is what we've landed on as an institution. And Aggie orange is a nod to our agricultural college roots. So those are the primary colors that we should be using here and here. And then we also have a tertiary palette that is only meant to be used for accents. So it goes, the idea is that it goes with CSU. Each one of these complements CSU green. And if you use it sparingly, it can add attention to what you're doing. If you think back to the slide where I was talking about percent of Colorado residents, percent of diverse students, et cetera, we used this alfalfa color to kind of make those numbers pop. So that would be an example of a way that you could use it as an accent color on top of the CSU green. Good times. I will also note on the brand website, there's color. On the left-hand side, there's also templates. So you can download PowerPoint templates, Word templates, et cetera, to use them that are already branded for CSU. And the reason I share that is the icons that I used on that second slide talking about the IR data, those came straight from that template. So they have them in CSU green, CSU white, and 80% black. In those PowerPoint templates, they have a ton of them. So you can just pull and use those. They've already been approved for use. And then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so brand standards are our friends. And I have just a few more slides for you here. I've said a lot to you in not a lot of minutes. So I would say in closing, don't try to do all the things at once. I saw this presentation in 2020, and especially as it related to simplifying some of the graphs, that spoke to my soul, and I wanted to implement all the things in every presentation from here until the end of time, and I got very overwhelmed very fast. Maybe that's just me, and just don't feel like you have to do it all. Pick one thing, right? Like if we are grayscaling the lines in the alternative break marketing graphic so that only the lines that we want to showcase are in actual color, that's one thing that you could focus on. You could just remove the lines from your graphs. You could use a word cloud instead of a graph. You could say, I'm going to move forward with just using brand standard colors now. That's going to be my focus, is making sure I'm creating a cohesive look in the thing that I'm doing. Pick one thing, implement it. Try it, see how it goes. Keep it simple. As we learned, more is rarely better, especially when you're trying to tell a very specific story, right? I'm thinking about your research, thinking about at the end of it, there's going to be a story you're going to want to tell. What is that story? And then how do you highlight that through the visuals that you're showing people? Knowing your audience will inform your choices. Like we talked about with the color scheme earlier, it could also be how you present to a student audience could be different than how you present to a professional audience. Maybe not. I'm not putting assumptions out into the universe. I'm just giving examples about how you might want to share data. And then again, that focus is really the thing. When you read through the data, when you finish this research project and read through, did you tell me yesterday you were reading a bunch of research?
Yeah, different research project, but yes.
Right? So if you're reading through all these kinds of things, what are the main takeaway messages? And then how do you take the data from those pieces that you were reading and showcase this is actually what we wanted to see. This is actually what the findings were and how we might operationalize them. So focusing on what those core messages are is really going to be helpful. Lest you think I would let you walk away with no resources. I kind of got out of control. But I think these are going to be helpful. A lot of these came from the presentation that I referenced earlier that I saw in 2020 at the Student Affairs Assessment Institute by Matt Venice is his last name. But I added some things here that I think are helpful and or specific to Colorado State University. So software usually involves money. So if you are doing this as a student, you may or may not have access to these things, and you may or may not have funding to purchase said things. But if you're working with university housing, just as an example, Nick Sweeten is a big fan of Power BI. And so he's working on building dashboards to help people see data in real time. Like, how close are we to meeting our metrics? What do we need to do to kind of get from point A to point B? So if you're interested in that, kind of have a conversation with him. CSU, our institutional research planning and effectiveness folks, have access to Tableau. and it takes vast amounts of information and shows them in the different visual kind of ways. We only have like 3 licenses right now, so it's not like a enterprise license just yet, but we will, I think, have access to Tableau or use of Tableau in time. And the other ones are just things to kind of consider. Websites, some ideas for infographics. I use word art for my word clouds. Used to use Wordle, RIP. But I like word art because it allows you to remove words. So say you're creating a word cloud from open-ended questions or open-ended paragraphs as it relates to research on biochemistry. I'm just going to keep using you as an example. And it comes back, and biochemistry is the biggest word in the word cloud. Yeah, duh. We're talking about biochemistry, right? So word art allows you to remove that word so that you can see what is it about biochemistry or what is it about whatever we're studying instead of the thing that we're studying. So oftentimes we'll see this with students, right? When I worked in parent and family programs, the open-ended responses usually started with my student or students, kind of a thing. So I need to remove students because we are obviously talking about students, but what about students? And this platform allows you to do that. Images you can find all over the place. CSU has a Shutterstock account, so you can that like our professional photographers upload to. So you can get really high quality photos just by going to Shutterstock and doing entering CSU. Most of them are free, some of them not. But if you need like a glorious picture of the front of the Student Center at sunset, that's your jam, okay? And then the last piece is the icons and glyphs. So a couple of different resources there, and I included our brand standards. There's a ton of things on the brand standards website, but also the icons that are in the templates PowerPoint. And then the last piece is these are folks and websites that are doing the work. These folks are actively talking about and thinking about data visualization in business context and non-higher ed context, but still really super helpful in terms of thinking about the ways in which we progress this work and make it easier and better and simpler for people to understand the message we're trying to share. And I'll highlight 2 of them. Stephanie Evergreen, if you go to her website, she has a Rate My Data Visualization portion of her website. So I think it's great. Could someone else tell me that it is or isn't? That's a great resource there. She also has checklists and just resources to be like things to think about as you're perfecting your own skills and honing a little bit in. So that's a really good website. And then DataViz is a hashtag because it's a Twitter search. Like it's not a website. You got to go to Twitter, search, and you'll find data visualization resources. A lot of memes. They're kind of funny. So if you have a dry sense of humor, join me. And the last piece I just added here was Smashing Magazine did a really good job, I think, of breaking out Gestalt Principles and defining them, but also giving examples of what they look like. So there's 3 different articles that I've linked here that just make it easy to sort of figure out when you're thinking about closure. A great example is the FedEx symbol, where between the E and the X there's an arrow in the negative space, and you can see that because it's closed in, right? So it just gives some examples and cool things like that to help you think a little bit more about design principles when you're showing data visualization. Okay, last but certainly not least, all the references. And I really want to, I didn't put it in here, I probably should before I send it out. But on the very first slide, you may have seen where it said significant credit to Matt Venice. So a lot of this is based on what he presented at the ACPA Student Affairs Assessment Institute. He works for the Macmillan Group, so he just compiled a bunch of things and showed a bunch of resources. I took that information and plugged it into the CSU framework, right, to use our brand standards, to use our data, to use examples that made sense here. But a lot of this is from his brain, so if you're citing things or using things from this presentation, please give credit to Matt. I just adapted, okay? Okay, I made it, 47 minutes. There's an assessment that if you complete as you leave, I would be really grateful. And this will be recorded. I will send you the information, questions, things you all want to talk about.
I always have questions on students. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Definitely going to be digging into it deeper. How how would you slowly incorporate this into like an office culture?
Yeah. When you say that, I know the office that you work in. Are you thinking professional staff, student staff, or yes? Yes.
But mostly professional staff.
I do think sharing this as a resource, right? I'd be glad to come in and talk to professional staff about some of these ideas and resources, and then to have a conversation about it, right? Like in a staff meeting, saying, here's something that we learned. Just even going through the example of simplifying the graph, right? What are when we put things out with our office name on it, what are the things that we want to make sure that we're simplifying or condensing to be able to tell this story, right? Or do we need to create thought partners within our own organization so that I'm saying, hey, Ollie, I had this idea, or we got this survey back from Project Homeless Connect, and I'm gonna come back in here, and this is kind of what I think the findings are. This is how I'm thinking of displaying it. Do you see it in the same way? Do you see it differently? Being able to kind of converse about some of those things and creating space to do that, I think is really the important part of the intentionality behind it, if that makes sense. Doing it for like academic units, research projects, those kinds of things, I think we have to look at what are the formatting requirements of what you'd be publishing, right, in a research paper, just as an example. But within that, how can we still incorporate some brand standards? How can we still incorporate some of these ways to simplify the message? Because I just read a thing in the Chronicle this morning, and maybe you all did too, that was about where it's measuring where people are going, where first-year students are attending in their home states and adjacent states. And there's a lot of colors in the graphs that they're showing that don't make, there's no rhyme or reason to why the colors are the way they are. So my brain had to work a lot harder versus if they would have picked a color scheme and gone with the entire thing in the research paper. So just simple things like that make it a little bit easier for readers to digest over time. Yeah, and I think if there's like one thing you decide on as a staff, like pick it and stick to it, right? And help each other. Yeah.
The survey is not active yet.
Oh, it's good to know. I will let the slice folks know that that is true. Thank you for naming it. Yeah. Shape the trainer. Just kidding. Yeah. That. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate you all. If you have questions, need help, I'll send this out, but also holler if I can be helpful in any way.
Cool.
Okay. Bye.